Well, I'm the LANDFIRE Reference Data Administrator, so I kind of wrangle in all the data that comes in. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. There. All right, LANDFIRE has relied on a vast collection of geo-referenced data to help develop and update our data products. We collect the data through two different avenues. One is multi-agency data calls. We have a list of data contacts, direct contacts that we've compiled from federal, state, local, and private entities that we send our data call letters out to. And we also send them out through a top-down approach. So we'll send it out via the heads of the Forest Service and the Department of Interior. And it kind of gets filtered down to who may be. And another way we collect data is we also search for data on web-based data clearinghouses. An example of that would be the MPS USGS Vegetation Characterization Program. You can download vegetation data from their site for various national parks. And we also collect data from agency or corporate database systems. We have a direct data sharing agreement with Forest Inventory Analysis, or FIA, so we have access to their vegetation and fuels data. Another agency database we access is the FACTS database, which is a Forest Service activity tracking system, and they have information on vegetation and fuel treatments that we access for our updates. The initial suite of products were developed during LANDFIRE 2001 National, and we sent out a data call that focused on collecting vegetation and fuel plot data for National. And this data was processed into the LANDFIRE Reference Database, or the LFRDB, which I'll be talking about in more detail. The LANDFIRE Reference Database is essentially a compilation of geo-referenced field data describing vegetation and fuel attributes. Some of the vegetation type data we have in there is like species composition data, where we have cover and height for plant taxons. We also have community occurrence data, or cover type classifications, exotics data, and so those are some examples of vegetation data we store in the LFRDB. Some of the fuel data we store are fuel loadings like biomasses and information on canopy fuel base heights. So those are some examples of those. Data we're collecting from many different sources and sampling methods. We get all sorts of different projects submit data to us, so we essentially convert it into a common database structure, and then we have it compiled so it can be easily queried and summarized. There are also several key attributes that we derive from the acquired data and that we incorporate into the LFRDB. Some of these include existing and potential vegetation types, which are based on Nature Serves ecological systems. And we also do things like derive uncompacted con ratios and various canopy fuel metrics that are also included within the LFRDB. Here's kind of an overview of what's in the LANDFIRE Reference Database. There are 817,393 geo-referenced plots in the LFRDB, and those came from 629 different sources of data, which were contributed by federal, state, local, and private entities. If we look at all the data that we have archived in the LFRDB, we find that 45% was acquired through the data call, and about 55% was acquired by LANDFIRE personnel searching either web-based data clearinghouses or agency corporate database systems. This kind of shows you a distribution of the plots that we have throughout the United States in the LFRDB. This slide, however, does not show the location of plots that have confidential coordinates. So there's about 99,000 plots that have confidential coordinates, such as the Forest Inventory Analysis data, that aren't on this map. But you can still get a good sense of where our information is located. We have many different contributors to the LFRDB, and this is kind of a breakdown of where some of this data came from and where we can find it. Obviously, multi-agency data and U.S. Forest Service data are pretty major players. They've contributed a lot of data to the LFRDB. Multi-agency is just like several agencies working on a project together, and that's in that category. And one thing to know about the Forest Service data is that about 40% of that Forest Service contribution came from the Forest Inventory Analysis data, so that is a pretty big player within the LFRDB. Some other important contributors include state, BLM, USGS, and MPS. The miscellaneous category is made up of a bunch of different contributors. And they include things like non-governmental organizations, tribal, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Those are all kind of in that miscellaneous category, and each of those entities contributed about less than 1.5% of the data to the LFRDB. There are several different main types of data in the LFRDB that we can kind of summarize. One is species composition data, and these are records that essentially have canopy cover estimates per plant taxon. And this data can be run through what we call the LANDFIRE auto key, which keys these plots to existing vegetation type, and then they can be used for existing vegetation mapping. Another type of data we have in there is community occurrence data. Usually these records don't have any associated species composition data, so maybe all we get is a cover type classification. And if the cover type classification is significant enough, we can crosswalk it to our existing vegetation types and also use it for potentially mapping. Vegetation structure data, essentially any data that has information on heights, either per life form or plant taxon, which can inform height products. We also store exotic plant data in the LFRDB, and these plots are pretty much the ones that aren't included in the species composition data. So they're plots that have only information on exotic plants. And we also have fuels data. And it's a combination of surface and canopy fuels data, and that information can be used to inform development of some of those products. If we look at all the data we have, we can see the percent of total records that are attributed with each of the different data types. One record might have more than one data type, so these do add up to over to 100%, because one record might have species composition and fuels data, so it gets counted in both categories. As you can see, over half the data in the LFRDB has some type of species composition information associated with it. About a third of the data has vegetation structure. About a quarter has information on exotic plants. And 19% we have community or cover classification type labels. And about 17% of the data has either surface or canopy fuels data. And of that 17%, about 87% have information on canopy fuels, while 23% have information on surface fuels. And some of those plots have information on both canopy and surface fuels, so that's kind of why it adds up to over to 100. But it's kind of a breakdown of what is currently stored in the LFRDB and the information that we have. The LFRDB provides ground truth data for mapping and modeling vegetation patterns and conditions, and for calibrating models developed by the LANDFIRE team. Some examples, if we have species composition data or community occurrence data that are attributed with existing vegetation types, that information can be used for existing vegetation mapping. We also have a public version of the LFRDB that is available. A subset of the field sample data that are used in production of the LANDFIRE national deliverables are available for public access. Certain proprietary or sensitive data have been removed from the LFRDB and are not available in the public versions. An example of that is we don't serve up the forest inventory and analysis data in our public LFRDB, so that won't be in there. You can download the public versions of the LFRDB by geographic region at our website. www.landfire.gov. And there are about 276,000 geo-referenced plots in the public LFRDB that were collected from 260 different sources of data. Once LANDFIRE National was completed, the LANDFIRE team established an operation and maintenance strategy for updating products to keep them as current as possible. LANDFIRE 2001-2000 refresh was kind of the first phase of updates that LANDFIRE developed. And during refresh, LANDFIRE updated vegetation and fuel layers to reflect landscape changes that resulted from disturbances in vegetation or fuel treatments. The LANDFIRE disseminated a second data call letter to gather information that would help us update these vegetation and fuel data products. The primary focus was to collect perimeter or polygon data of disturbances in vegetation or fuel treatments, and we also collected perimeter or polygon data of exotic plant locations. A secondary focus was to continue to collect vegetation and fuel plot data and maintain and update the LFRDB on an as-need basis. The LANDFIRE, like I stated before, LANDFIRE's refresh data called perimeter data of disturbances in vegetation or fuel treatments were collected, and we focus on disturbances and treatments that occurred from 1999 to 2008. And we had data from many different sources that were all compiled into a standard attribute table in the LANDFIRE Refresh, our LANDFIRE Refresh Events geodatabase. And that way the data could be easily summarized and queried in a consistent manner. There are about 599,000 disturbances and treatment perimeters compiled for refresh. These came from 325 different sources of data that were contributed by federal, state, local, and private entities. If we look at all the data we have archived in the events layer, we find that 43% was acquired through the data call and about 57% was acquired by LANDFIRE personnel, once again searching web-based data clearinghouses or agency corporate database systems. This slide kind of shows the distribution of the event perimeters through the United States. We kind of get a sense of where the data occurs. We have more heavily concentrated in the West as compared to the Midwest and the East. Lots of different people contributed data to the events, and so this is a breakdown of who kind of contributed. As you can see, the Forest, our U.S. Forest Service contribution accounted for quite a bit of the data we have archived in the events. We pulled a lot of data from the Forest Activity Tracking System, or the FACS system, and so that accounts for a large portion of that. Also, multi-agency data sources played a significant role. The BLM and state also contributed quite a bit of data. A lot of our BLM data came from either state or field offices, but we also incorporated a national BLM fire layer. And a lot of the state data came from like state departments of natural resources and state divisions of forestry, some areas like that. NPS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were also contributors. And in the miscellaneous category, we have non-governmental organizations and tribal organizations that contributed to that category. There are several different the main disturbance and treatment types that we can kind of break out of the events data and summarize. And this will kind of give you a sense of how much data or where these different disturbance and treatment types are in the events. As you can see, over a quarter of the data is either insect and disease perimeters. About 22% is attributed to harvest, and that includes any type of timber harvest activity like clear cuts and thinnings. Fire accounts for about 21%, and that's both wildfire and prescribed fire in that core category. Reforestation and mechanical each account for about 13% of the data. And reforestation are any like seeding or planting events, and mechanical is kind of a catch-all term for a lot of different activities related to fuels reduction or site prep. Some things included are like thinning of fuels, lop and scatter, and mastication. That's all included in that mechanical. Control treatments are treatments where we use biological or agents or chemical agents to control on-land plants and diseases, and then weather, any type of weather event that might try to change in fuels or vegetation. The events data are the primary input for developing LANDFIRE disturbance products, which are used to update vegetation and fuel products, and Joel will be talking more about disturbance products later this afternoon. We also collected exotics data for refresh from 1990 to 2008, and they are processed into a separate layer from the LANDFIRE Exotics geodatabase. There are about 329,000 exotic plant perimeters from 83 different sources. 36% of that data is acquired through the data call, and 65% were acquired by LANDFIRE personnel. That's the distribution of our exotic perimeters. You can see where those are located. Exotics data contributor affiliation. So here's who contributed to our exotics data. Once again, the Forest Service and multi-agency data sources were pretty big players, but BLM, state, National Park Service, and municipal also contributed data. There is also a subset of the full suite of events and exotics data that were used in the production of the LANDFIRE 2008 refresh deliverables that has been made available for public use. The public version includes both the events and exotics data layers, and you can be downloaded at our website by geographic region. There are about 539,000 event records and 198,000 exotic records occurring from 1999 to 2008 that are archived in the public events geodatabase. Right now we are currently looking on the next update phase, which is LANDFIRE 2010. LANDFIRE has collected events and exotics data through 2010, and this data is going to be used to update our products to circa 2010 conditions. And during these updates, the LFRDB is going to be maintained and updated as needed. Participation, we have a chance to participate by, we have continuing to accept data as we move into the future. We're going to need more data. We have transitioned to a yearly data call, so the data submission due date is November 15th of each year. And our primary focus is collecting event perimeter or disturbance and treatment data or exotic plant perimeter data. And our secondary focus will be to continue to accept contributions of vegetation and field plot data from all years. This past November 15th, we collected data from 2011. Next November 15th, we'll be collecting data from 2012, so kind of like a year behind is what we're looking for. That's where our concentration is. And if you'd like to, contribute data, I have some contact information at the end, and you can get a hold of me and take that. Another objective of LANDFIRE Updates is to also just address any discrepancies between our current map products and known field conditions. So we also accept information on feedback information about our data products, so we know where these discrepancies exist, and also provides information that will help us improve our data products. Here's my contact information, my email and phone. So you feel free to contact me if there's any data you'd like to submit, or if you'd like to be placed on our data call mailing list. So I'll keep you updated on our data needs and due dates if you're on our list too. So, nice. Are there any questions?